The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I've been wrestling with this gospel passage all week, thinking and praying and reflecting more than I normally do. And I got to tell you, that phrase jumped out at me, and I thought to myself, that's not right. A good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. No, he doesn't. Right? The job of a shepherd is to protect the sheep. Yes? Makes sense? Okay. All right. Now, what's going to get the sheep? What's going to attack the sheep? Wolves. Right? So let's say the wolves come. Brand new shepherd, first time in the field. He's out there protecting the sheep, got staff in hand, ready to go. Sheep are scared. Here come the wolves. The shepherd goes out and says, "Okay, wolves, eat me." Well, how does that help the sheep? Oh, it may for a few days, right? Maybe the wolves kill him and their thirst for blood is sated for a few days. But now that the shepherd is gone, what does that benefit the sheep? Because without a shepherd, then the wolves are just going to come back and have a banquet on the sheep that are now unprotected. So why would Jesus say a good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep? And the reason I say this to you, now that we're thinking about it, it may seem obvious to us, but it took a moment to get there. The people who heard Jesus say this would have automatically disagreed with him. No, you, a carpenter, you obviously know nothing about sheep. A good shepherd does not lay down his life for his sheep. A good shepherd fights the wolves. Do you remember David and Goliath? You know that story? You remember how David, who maybe was like 10 or 11 years old, he was a little more than a small child. He was a shepherd. He was actually a pretty good shepherd. He went up against, single combat, against the greatest living warrior at that time, Goliath, standing almost 7 feet tall with a massive sword. No one was a better warrior than Goliath. And David goes out there with the simple weapons of a shepherd. He had a sling, which was like 2 straps of leather with a little pocket at the end. He got a smooth stone, put it in the pocket of the sling, and he was whipping the sling around, and with lots and lots and lots of practice, kind of like throwing a ball, he was able to fling this smooth stone, and at distance hit Goliath square in the middle of the forehead, and Goliath dropped dead. So if a boy, a child, is able to kill a 7-foot-tall giant warrior with 1 stone, that's what a shepherd could do. That's how lethal a shepherd was. That was a useful tool to keep the wolves away, right? Are you following me? So why, and we got to get into this question, because this is the question that everyone listening to Jesus would have thought. They all were familiar with shepherds. They all knew the work. They knew the way of life. Their entire clothing and their whole economy was based off of the sheep. So they understood this better than we do. We got to wrestle with this. Why? Jesus, why? That doesn't sound like a good shepherd that lays down your life for the sheep. That sounds like an incompetent shepherd. So what's going on? Well, I think this is an instance where our gospel passage, sometimes the gospels we hear are just really short, just a couple of verses. But if you were to read the chapter, John chapter 10, if you were to get into the whole chapter a little bit, I think we could get clues as to what's going on. So let me do that for you this morning. Now, right after this passage, John chapter 10, verse 22, we read these words. At this time, so as Jesus is speaking, as Jesus is calling himself the Good Shepherd, at this time, the festival of the dedication was taking place in Jerusalem. It was winter. What's the ancient Jewish festival that happens in wintertime? You know, you got the 9-branch menorah, dreidels, and all this wonderful stuff. Hanukkah, yes, okay, thank you. I guess we're not awake yet. I'm struggling myself. Apart from the festival of light and the candles staying lit miraculously, what else? Do you remember what else the Feast of Hanukkah celebrates? Judas Maccabee, in the year 167 AD, raised an army, and he started a rebellion against the Greeks. We all remember Alexander the Great, right? Alexander the Great conquers most of the known world, and that included Israel. So after Alexander the Great died, Judas Maccabee starts a rebellion, an army, and a 7-year war to kick out the Greeks. And the Feast of Hanukkah is the feast of the dedication because the Greeks had desecrated the temple in Jerusalem. So Judas Maccabee gathers everyone and they reconsecrate, they rededicate the temple in Jerusalem. That is the Feast of Hanukkah. That is the feast that Jesus is saying this. As Jesus is saying these words, the Good Shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. What is going on in Jerusalem is the feast of the dedication of the temple. Now, this may be a connection that takes just one more step to make. If you were to read the second book of Maccabees, the second half of the book, chapter 8 through 15, is a vivid description of the 7-year war that Judas Maccabee led against the Greeks. And it actually gives numbers as to how many people Judas Maccabee and his soldiers killed. Over 7 years, they killed over 173,100 people, plus one battle that was so awful they could not count the dead, and the dead turned a local lake, a quarter of a mile wide, turned the water of that lake into crimson red from the blood that was spilled in that battle. That's how brutal and vicious this war was. And the Feast of the Dedication, while it was focused on the temple, was more a feast of the celebration of the successful, violent revolution. Maybe now we see it. Maybe now it's beginning to come into focus. Do you see it yet? At that time, the festival of the dedications took place, and the people gathered around Jesus and said to him, "How long are you going to keep us in suspense? Can't you just tell us plainly if you are the Messiah? Tell us. Are you the Messiah?" We're celebrating Judas Maccabee. We're celebrating Judas Maccabee's violent revolution, violent war. We believe that Judas Maccabee was doing God's will by slaughtering all of our enemies. We believe that was a holy endeavor. Can you please tell us, Jesus, carpenter from Nazareth, who knows nothing, obviously, about being a shepherd, can you please tell us, are you the Messiah? Judas Maccabee tried to be the Messiah. Are you going to be a military Messiah? Are you going to start a war? We no longer have to fight the Greeks. We now have to fight the Romans. Tell us plainly, Jesus. Just come out with it. Are you going to start an army? Will you fight a war for God? And he refuses to answer the question. Earlier in the chapter, he says this twice. I tell you plainly, those who have come before me, all who have come before me, are thieves and bandits, are violent revolutionaries, and they're not of God. This is what Jesus opens his remark with. And what he's talking about, we don't understand always because context is important. He's talking about Judas Maccabee. He's condemning Judas Maccabee as a thief and a bandit. Judas Maccabee was not doing the will of my Father, Jesus is saying. I am doing the will of my Father. I will lay down my life for my sheep. Judas Maccabee wanted to fight for the sheep. He had it backwards. He had it wrong. And if you're looking for a military Messiah, you have it backwards. You have it wrong. If you think violence is the solution, you've got it wrong. That's not the answer to the problem here. Jesus is directly addressing the celebration going on in Jerusalem by condemning the violent nationalism of all those in his day and age. But let's not think that Judas Maccabee was alone. No, Judas Maccabee, 167, led a violent revolution, supposedly for God. A guy by the name of Judas of Gamala led another one in the year 6 A.D. Theudas led yet another one in 45 A.D. The Great Jewish Revolt happened in 66 A.D. The Kitos War happened in 115 A.D. And then the Bar Kokhba Revolt happened in 135 A.D. And the Romans at this point were so sick and tired of this, they literally destroyed the entire city of Jerusalem. The whole country was so lusting for blood that they wanted a Messiah that would kill for them. And Jesus said, anyone who's willing to kill to do good is a thief and a robber. It is not my Father's will. That's the point. That's why the shepherd lays down his life. Violence, any form of violence, can never fulfill the Father's will. I know you just heard those words, but did you understand what I just said? Did you hear a critique of American patriotism that loves to wave the flag and celebrate war? Did you hear our culture, which is absolutely idolatrous with a love of war? Do you hear how the world in which we live celebrates violence and weapons and war and oppression, and we are convinced, our leaders, our cultural leaders are absolutely convinced in every way imaginable that the most noble and virtuous solution to every one of our problems, or just about every one of our problems, is the application of violence. That's our world. We are sick with the idolatrous love of war. And so Jesus today would be saying the exact same thing to us as he did to the people back then. Violence can never fulfill the will of the Father. We, our culture, has it backwards. We gotta wake up. We can't just simply do Jesus-shaped things, think Jesus-shaped thoughts, pray Jesus-shaped prayers on a Sunday morning, and then leave here and spend the rest of our week buying into our cultural agenda for the ruination of the world. That's not the will of the Father. Now, why else? There's one other reason. Why else would the shepherd lay down his life for his sheep? First off, he lays down his life for his sheep because any application of violence is never going to actually bring about justice and peace. More violence can never bring about more peace. More violence can never bring about justice or harmony. Violence always only begets violence. So that's the first reason. But what's the other reason? Why does Jesus not fight the wolves like every other shepherd would? He told us. Maybe we didn't hear. I lay down my life because I have others that do not belong to this fold. Even the wolves are members of Jesus'